Welcome to our Bible study for Sunday, July 27. This will actually be the last study that really focuses on the temple in Jerusalem, and then we're going to move on to how we ourselves are called to be temples. But this is a passage that comes out of Matthew. But before we get there, I want to mention that just this week I saw an interview with biblical scholar Paul Penley, and in it he said that one characteristic of Jesus that we sometimes miss is that very often when somebody makes a point, Jesus makes a counterpoint. For example, although he makes the point and the counterpoint, a good example is Jesus says, "You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." There's the point. "But I say to you," so here comes the counterpoint, "if someone strikes you, or do not resist an evildoer, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, offer to him the other as well." And so he is making a counterpoint to the point that we might make. And honestly, when people do this frequently, it can be really annoying when people just seem to be trying to always one-up us a little bit. And so I say, well, the sky is blue. And somebody says, well, not always. It's black at night. Well, that's just kind of the point, counterpoint, just make kind of, for the sake of argument, is no good at all. But that really isn't what Jesus is doing. What Jesus is trying to do is take us deeper, maybe deeper than we want to go, but deeper into the truth of God, so that our relationship with God can be better, so that our understanding of life can be better, and so that our understanding of Him can be better. And nowhere is this really more apparent than in this morning's passage. It takes place in Matthew 24, and our passage is 1 to 8, and the lesson is 15 to 24. I'm going to read 15 to 28, and I'll explain that later. But notice the point the disciples make, and then Jesus' fairly long counterpoint to their point. It goes, "As Jesus came out of the temple and was going away, his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Then he asked them, 'You see all these, do you not? Truly I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down.' When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' And Jesus answered them, 'Beware that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed. For this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of this is but the beginning of the birth pangs.' And then we're going to skip ahead to verse 15. 'So when you see the desolating sacrilege standing in the holy place, as was spoken of by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down to take what is in the house. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For at that time there will be great suffering, such as not been seen from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, Look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce great signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, Look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, Look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so it will be with the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather.'" Whew, pretty strange passage, huh? Well, let us think a little bit about the context. This is taking place during Holy Week. We talked last week from John 2. In John, Jesus goes to Jerusalem several times, but in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he only goes to Jerusalem that final Holy Week. And the disciples are there, and they point out the temple to Jesus, which is kind of odd. He obviously knew the temple, but they are trying to make a point, and the point they seem to be is that we have seen you, Jesus, driving out the money changers and the animals from the temple, and we know that the time is going to come that you are going to be the Messiah, and you're going to drive not only money changers and animal handlers out, but you're going to drive the Romans out of our country, and Israel will take her place in world history and in world dominance, and the temple will be your home base. And so they're kind of calling attention to that, saying, look at these great stones. And they were great stones. We mentioned a little bit last week as well. In last week's lesson, Jesus said, tear down this temple, and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. And the scoffers said to him, we've been building this thing for 46 years, and they had a number of years left to go before they finish. And how could you tear it down and in 3 days it be built back again? The stones were huge. Some of the stones in that temple were literally as big as school buses. And you may know that Jesus was making a prediction that actually came true as well. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But the disciples are saying, look at this. These huge stones, this seemingly impregnable monument to the power and the glory of God. It will be here forever, and it's going to be your home base, and we can't wait to see this happen. And all of that is contained just in that statement. Well, look here at these great stones. And Jesus says, well, I'm going to tell you something. These stones are going to be torn down so badly that not one will be sitting on top of the other. And we can imagine that it may be a rather quiet walk as they leave the temple. They walk out of the gate of Jerusalem. They go across the Kidron Valley and up to the Mount of Olives, where apparently he was staying. And privately, then the disciples ask, what's going on? When is all this going to happen? And so we can imagine that it is just unimaginable to them that in the year AD 70, which is going to be a few years out from this is taking place sometime in the late 20s or the early 30s. We don't know exactly what year Jesus was born. And so sometime in that time frame, in AD 70, the temple will be destroyed, and it was just incomprehensible. But not only because the temple was so massive, how would you destroy it, but also because it was the house of God. Why would God allow that to happen? And so when it happened, in many ways, people were taken by surprise, and Jesus is trying to warn them here, don't be taken by surprise about this. The best analogy I can get for me to try to understand what this was like is that in the early first couple of years of this century, we had really gotten a little bit complacent as folk in the United States. Two great big oceans separated us from most of our enemies. It seemed like we had and did have a huge military and a very impressive intelligence gathering society or community. And so we didn't think much about threats that we might have to us. And little did we know that just a very few people with box cutters could hijack airplanes and turn those airplanes into weapons of mass destruction and shake all of us to the core. And part of the reason I think we were so shaken on September 11, 2001 is just we did not see it coming. We couldn't imagine. Well, the disciples likewise just simply cannot imagine. And so as this passage continues, Jesus is saying, now you're going to see wars and rumors of wars and false messiahs and all this kind of stuff. Those things are going to happen. That's not necessarily the end times. And yet when there start being famines and earthquakes and false messiahs and whatnot, then we are in the birth pangs. And if you are like me, you hear rather regularly somebody saying, well, look at the news. There was an earthquake and so. Obviously, Jesus is getting ready to come back. Or Israel and Iran are in this war, and we have just bombed Iran. There are wars. There are rumors of wars. Obviously, Jesus is getting ready to come back. That's not what Jesus is saying, actually. What Jesus is basically saying is there's going to be really difficult times ahead for all of us, and we need to understand the vital, most important truths there are. And so part of what Jesus is doing, almost oddly, is he's making a very specific prediction. The temple is going to fall. And in that second part of the passage that I read, beginning with the 15th verse, he talks about the desolating sacrilege. And we're like, what in the world is that? The desolating sacrilege in the holy place that Daniel talks about. And part of the answer to that, to what that is found in that last verse, which is why I wanted to read through to the end, where Jesus says, "Where the corpse is, the vultures will gather." Now, this is likely his way of saying that the desolating sacrilege will be when the Romans hang on the temple a Roman eagle, and then they bring into the temple in AD 70, as they're destroying it, the Roman standards that have the eagles on them. And the Romans wouldn't have liked this. In some ways, we Americans might not like this, but ancients understood, or Jesus at least understood, that eagles gain much of their sustenance from corpses, from scavenging. We want to think of them as these mighty, noble, powerful hunters, and in some ways they are that too. But most of their food comes from scavenging, and so when there is a corpse, the eagles and the vultures show up. And so by saying that where the corpse is, the vultures will be, Jesus is saying that all of Israel is going to be a corpse, and the way that you will know that is when the vultures show up, and that is the Romans with their eagle standards, and they're going to tear things down. Now, that's exactly the opposite of what the disciples think the Messiah is going to do. The Messiah is going to drive them out, of course. But here Jesus saying, no, this is going to happen. And this tells you that the birth pangs are there. He doesn't say this is the end of the world. He says this is letting you know this is the way of the world, in a sense. And so what he is doing is not so much making a prediction, although he does, and he's right. Not one stone stands upon another. The only stones that are left standing in that temple are the retaining wall, basically, that Herod built that kind of shores up the Temple Mount. And that's what we call the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall today. But there are none of the stones that built the temple are one on top of the other. Now, the Romans did tear all those down. So that prediction is correct, but that wasn't saying, well, when that happens, the end of the world is near. We know that. It's been now 2,000 years almost since that happened. Rather, what he is saying is, at any age that we live in, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be famines. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be terrible things that happen because evil still has somewhat of a hold on our world. But what Jesus is trying to help us recognize is that although the World Trade Center may seem to be permanent, it's not. The temple may seem to be permanent, but it's not. God is permanent. God alone is immortal. And so when we're looking for what do we need to hang on to, well, what we need to hang on to is not institutions, even the institution of the temple or the church. We hang on not to people or to ideas or anything that is temporary, but rather we hang on to the one and eternal God. And so there's a lot of lessons for us in this story, and I want to tick through a few, and we'll be looking a little bit at the passage as well. And again, recognize God alone is permanent. Don't put your trust in a building, in an institution, in a bank account, in a person, in your health. All of those things ultimately will fail. All of those things will ultimately pass away. And that's painful to think about, and maybe is kind of depressing to think about, but it's true. But because God is permanent, we don't have to fear that all of these other things are temporary. And so when Jesus tells us that there are wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes and all, he isn't telling us, well, the end of times is right here now. There's a sense in which all of us want to live on the cusp of history. All of us want to be at these defining moments. But Jesus is saying, not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's coming back soon. His point is a lot deeper than that. And that is that when terrible things happen, these are just birth pangs. Now, birth pangs are difficult. Birth pangs are painful. But what is the ultimate result of birth pangs is brand new life coming into the world. And when we put our trust in God and the permanence of God, we recognize God is in the birthing business. God is in the resurrection business. And so even when we're going through tremendous pain, God is able to bring out of that life and new life, even miraculous life. Now think about the context of this passage. Jesus is telling his disciples this, and he is getting ready to go to the cross. All of the ideas that they have about the Messiah they're about to find are going to be temporary because the one whom they think is the Messiah is going to be arrested and brutalized and die on a cross, and some are going to run away as cowards. Others will have to simply impotently stand at the foot of that cross and without having any way of doing anything about it, watch him die a slow and a painful death. And with him at that moment dies all of their hopes and their dreams. That's like the temple being destroyed in a sense. They could not imagine that happening, and it happens right before their eyes. And then what happens? Well, we discover, though, that's just the birth pangs. Because 3 days later, out of that tomb emerges brand new life. And not just new life that is the new life that is the resurrected Lord, but the new life that the resurrected Lord offers to all of us through his death and resurrection. In February of 2024, it's a little over a year ago, I got a call from my youngest sister, Lori, and I'll never forget the call. Lee and I were actually literally walking out in our driveway. We had hooked up our truck to a trailer. We were going to get hay for the horses. We had run out of hay for the winter and going to buy some more hay. A perfectly ordinary day. And Lori calls me, and the first words out of her mouth are, "I'm tapping out." She had had a consult with a doctor and had realized that if she continued with chemotherapy, it would likely not prolong her life very much, if at all, and it would have all of the side effects the chemotherapy had had. And she was deciding that she was not going to fight the cancer anymore, and that her life was transitioning from a hope that her cancer could be beaten to recognizing that her cancer was going to beat her in one sense. It was going to take her life. But out of those horrible birth pangs, and I still, like I say, that those moments just seared into my memory. But out of those birth pangs arise with Lori, and then Lori testifying to us, tremendous amount of trust that she had in God, and she was able to laugh and make fun of her death. The doctors told her she'd have just a few months to live. May 14, I believe, was kind of, I think it was, or maybe it was May 30. But anyways, it sometime was supposed to be her expiration date, she called it. And after she passed her expiration date, she would laugh and say, you know, I've done more than I could. And she made sure to find a way to cherish the time that she had with family and with friends. She did this amazing party with her husband and her sons and their two daughters, where they made a Gilligan's Island party. And she went to thrift stores and she bought costumes or things to make costumes. And they even the dog, I think, was Thurston Howell. And they had this Gilligan's Island party because she wanted them to love life, even as she was actively dying. And she taught us so much. And so what Jesus is trying to teach us here is, when we have all of these terrible things happening to us, we still can turn to God and look to God, who is permanent, and we can recognize that these are but birth pangs, and God can bring life out of those. I'll be telling another couple stories about Lori in today's sermon, and so you'll have to listen to that if you'd like to see those, but other ways that God turned death into life. And so although we won't enjoy it, and although it is painful, Jesus is telling us here that we can look at evil and death in the face. And even when it seems to, and possibly even will, overwhelm us, we also can know that evil has a shelf life. Evil has an expiration date. God alone is permanent. God brings life out of death. And so thanks be to God. Perhaps not for the birth pangs. It's hard to be thankful for that, but for helping us recognize that the pain that we suffer, the things that are temporary that we lose, ultimately do bring about the birth pangs, which bring about resurrection and new life.